There was, thank God, a great voluptuary born to the American settlements against the niggardliness of the damning puritanical tradition. One who, by the single logic of his passion, which he rested on the savage life about him, destroyed at its spring that spiritually withering plague. For this he has remained since buried in a miscolored legend and left forgotten. Far from dead, however, and full of a rich, regenerative violence, he remains when his history will be carefully reported for us who have come after to call upon. Kentucky, the great wilderness beyond the western edge of the world, that dark and bloody ground of coming years, seemed to the colonists along the eastern North American seaboard as far away, nearly, and as difficult of approach as had the problematical world beyond the Western Ocean to the times prior to Columbus. If inhabited by men, then it was the savage with whom the settlers had long since experienced sufficient to make them loath to pry further, for the moment, beyond the securing mountain barrier. Clinging narrowly to their new foothold, dependent still on sailing vessels for a contact none too swift or certain with home, the colonists looked with fear to the west. They worked hard, and for the most part throve, suffering the material lacks of their exposed condition with intention. But they suffered also privations not even to be estimated, cramping and demeaning for a people used to a world less primitively rigorous. A spirit of insecurity calling upon thrift and self-denial remained their basic mood. Opposed to this lay the forbidden wealth of the unknown. Into such an atmosphere, more or less varied, more or less changed for better or worse in minds of different understanding, was born Daniel Boone, the foremost pioneer and frontiersman of his day. A man like none other about him, Boone had, for the life of his fellow settlers, high or low, no sympathy whatever. Was it his ancestry, full of a rural quietness from placid Dorset, or the sober Quaker training of his earlier associations that bred the instinct in him, made him ready to take desperate chances with his mind for pleasure? Certainly, he was not, as commonly believed, of that riffraff of hunters and Indian killers among which destiny had thrown him, the man of border foray, a link between the savage and the settler. His character was not this. Mild and simple-hearted, steady, not impulsive in courage, bold and determined, but always rather inclined to defend than attack. He stood immensely above that wretched class of men who are so often the preliminaries of civilization. Boone deliberately chose the peace of solitude, rather than to mingle in the wild wranglings and disputings of the society around him, from whom it was ever his first thought to be escaping, or he would never have penetrated to those secret places where later his name became a talisman. 3 years the junior of George Washington, Boone was taken while still a child from his birthplace on the upper waters of the Schuylkill River near Philadelphia to the then comparatively wild country of western Pennsylvania. Here Even as a boy, men stepped back to contemplate with more than ordinary wonder the fearlessness with which he faced the fiercer, wilder beasts that prowled around. It was the early evidence of his genius. At 18, with his love of the woods marked for good, and his disposition for solitude, taciturnity, and a hunter's life determined, the family moved again, this time from the rapidly settling country of Pennsylvania to the wild Yadkin, a river that takes its rise among the mountains that form the western boundary of North Carolina. With his arrival on the Yadkin, Daniel Boone married a neighbor's daughter, Rebecca Bryan, and together the young couple left the world behind them. Boone at once traversed the Yadkin Valley to a point still more remote from the seaboard and nearer the mountain. Here he placed his cabin. It was a true home to him. Its firelight shone in welcome to the rare stranger who found that riverside. But he was not to remain thus solitary. The lands along the Yadkin attracted the notice of other settlers, and Boone, at 30, found the smoke of his cabin no longer the only one that floated in the air. These accessions of companionship, however congenial to the greatest part of mankind, did not suit Boone. He soon became conscious that his time on the Yadkin was limited. The fields for adventure lay within his reach. The mountains were to be crossed, and a new and unexplored country, invested with every beauty, every danger, every incident that could amuse the imagination or quicken action, lay before him, the indefinite world of the future. Along the Clinch River and the Holston River, the mysteries of forest life grew more familiar. Boone learned even better than before that neither roof, nor house, nor bed was necessary to existence. There were, of course, many things to urge him on his natural choice. It was the time just preceding the Revolution. The colonial system of taxation was iniquitous to the last degree. This the pioneer could not fathom and would not endure. Such things Boone solved most according to his nature, by leaving them behind. At this point, Boone's life may be said really to begin. Facing his first great adventure, Boone was now in his best years. His age was 36. He is described by various writers as being 5 feet 10 inches high, robust, clean-limbed and athletic, fitted by his habit and temperament and by his physique for endurance, a bright eye, and a calm determination in his manner. In 1769, John Finley returned from a hunting trip beyond the mountain. He talked loud and long of the beauty and fertility of the country, and Daniel Boone was soon eagerly a listener. It touched the great keynote of his character, and the hour and the man had come. It was on the 1st of May, in the year 1769, that I resigned my domestic happiness for a time, and left my family and peaceful habitation on the Yadkin River in North Carolina, to wander through the wilderness of America in quest of the country of Kentucky. We proceeded successfully, and after a long and fatiguing journey through a mountain wilderness in a westward direction, on the 7th day of June following, we found ourselves on Red River, where John Finley had formerly been trading with the Indians, and from the top of an eminence saw with pleasure the beautiful level of Kentucky. Thus opens the so-called autobiography, said to have been written down from Boone's dictation, late in his life, by one John Filson. But the silly phrases and total disregard for what must have been the rude words of the old hunter serve only, for the most part, to make it a keen disappointment to the interested reader. Here the party practiced hunting till the 22nd day of December following. On this day, John Stewart and I had a pleasant ramble, but fortune changed the scene in the close of it. We had passed through a great forest. Nature was here a series of wonders and a fund of delight, and we were diverted with innumerable animals presenting themselves perpetually to our view. In the decline of the day, near the Kentucky River, as we ascended the brow of a small hill, a number of Indians rushed out of a thick canebrake upon us and made us prisoners. Escaping later, the two returned to their camp to find it plundered, and the others of their party gone. But now, by one of those determining chances which occur in all great careers, Squire Boone, Daniel's brother, who, with another adventurer, had set out to get news of the original party, if possible, came accidentally upon his brother's camp in the forest. Oh, it was a meeting of greatest importance and unbounded joy to Daniel Boone. For a short time there were now 4 together, but within a month the man Stewart was killed by Indians, while Squire Boone's companion either wandered off and was lost, or returned by himself to the colonies. Daniel and Squire were left alone. We were then in a dangerous and helpless situation, exposed daily to perils and death amongst the savages and wild beasts, not a white man in the country, but ourselves. Thus situated many 100 miles from our families, in the howling wilderness, we continued not in a state of indolence, but hunted every day, and prepared to defend ourselves against the winter storms. We remained there undisturbed during the winter. On the first day of May following, my brother returned home to the settlement by himself for a new recruit of horses and ammunition, leaving me by myself, without bread, salt, or sugar, without company of my fellow creatures, or even a horse or a dog. I confess I never was under greater necessity of exercising philosophy and fortitude. 1,000 dreadful apprehensions presented themselves to my view, and had undoubtedly disposed me to melancholy, if indulged. One day I undertook a tour through the country, and the diversity and beauty of nature I met with in this charming season expelled every gloom and vexatious thought. Not a breeze shook the most tremulous leaf. I had gained the summit of a commanding ridge, and looking around with astonishing delight, beheld the ample plain, the beauteous tracts below. All things were still. I kindled a fire near a fountain of sweet water, and feasted on a loin of a buck which a few hours before I had killed. Night came, and the earth seemed to gasp after the hovering moisture. But only impatience is kindled by the silly language of the asinine chronicler. But when Filson goes on to declare Boone's loneliness an uninterrupted scene of sylvan pleasures, it is a little too much to bear. Constant exposure to danger and death, a habitation which he states had been discovered by the savages, the necessity of such stratagems as the resort to the cane brake, rather than to take the risk of being found in his cabin, these have nothing of sylvan pleasures in them. Boone had too much strong sense to feel anything but patience amidst the scenes of his solitude. And yet, having sounded the depth of forest life, and having considered and weighed all it had to offer, he felt secure enough to brave the perils of an exploring tour. He saw the Ohio, and, unquestionably, from the results of this excursion, strengthened his determination to establish himself in such a land of delight. For 3 months he was alone. It was an ordeal through which few men could have passed. Certain it is that nothing but a passionate attachment of the most extraordinary intensity could have induced even him to undergo it. If there were perils, there was a pleasure keener, which bade him stay on, even in solitude, while his day was lasting. Surely he must have known that it was the great ecstatic moment of his life's affirmation. By instinct, and from the first, Boone had run past the difficulties encountered by his fellows in making the New World their own. An ecstasy cannot live without devotion, and he who is not given to some earth of basic logic cannot enjoy. So Boone lived to enjoy ecstasy through his single devotion to the wilderness with which he was surrounded. The beauty of a lavish, primitive embrace in savage, wild beast and forest, rising above the cramped life about him, possessed him wholly. Passionate and thoroughly given, he avoided the half-logic of stealing from the immense profusion. Someone must have taken the step. He took it. Not that he settled Kentucky or made a path to the west, not that he defended, suffered, hated, and fled, but because of a descent to the ground of his desire was Boone's life important, and remains still loaded with power. Power to strengthen every form of energy that would be voluptuous, passionate, possessive in that place which he opened. For the problem of the New World was, as every newcomer soon found out, an awkward one, on all sides the same. How to replace from the wild land that which, at home, they had scarcely known the old world meant to them, through difficulty and even brutal hardship, to find a ground to take the place of England. They could not do it. They clung, one way or another, to the old, striving the while to pull off pieces to themselves from the fat of the new bounty. Boone's genius was to recognize the difficulty as neither material nor political, but one purely moral and aesthetic. Filled with the wild beauty of the New World to overbrimming, so long as he had what he desired, to bathe in, to explore always more deeply, to see, to feel, to touch, his instincts were contented Sensing a limitless fortune which daring could make his own, he sought only with primal lust to grow close to it, to understand it, and to be part of its mysterious movements. Like an Indian. And among all the colonists, like an Indian, the ecstasy of complete possession of the new country was his alone. With the sense of an Indian, Boone felt the wild beasts about him as a natural offering. Like a savage, he knew that for such as he, their destined lives were intended. As an Indian to the wild, without stint or tremor, he offered himself to his world, hunting, killing with a great appetite, taking the lives of the beasts into his quiet, murderous hands, as they, or their masters, the savages, might take his own, if they were able, without kindling his resentment, as naturally as his own gentle son, his beloved brother, his nearest companions were taken, without his rancor being lifted. But he saw, and only he saw, the prototype of it all, the native savage. To Boone, the Indian was his greatest master, not for himself surely to be an Indian, though they eagerly sought to adopt him into their tribes, but the reverse, to be himself in a new world, Indian-like. If the land were to be possessed, it must be as the Indian possessed it. Boone saw the truth of the red man, not an aberrant type, to be feared and exterminated, but as a natural expression of the place, the Indian himself as right, the flower of his world. Keen then was the defeat he tasted, when, having returned safe to the colonies after his first ecstatic sojourn, and when, after long delay, having undertaken to lead a party of 40 settlers to the new country, his eldest son, among 5 others his own age, was brutally murdered by the savages at the very outset. It was a crushing blow, and although Boone and others argued against it, the expedition turned back, and with his sorrowing wife, Boone once more took up his homestead on the Yadkin. And this is the mark of his personality, that even for this cruel stroke he held no ill will against the red men. He never wavered for a moment in his clear conception of the Indian as a natural part of a beloved condition, the new world in which all lived together. Captured or escaping, outwitted by or outwitting the savages, he admired and defended them always as implacable and remorseless enemy to the red man that he proved. They admired and respected him to the end of his days. "You have bought the land," said an old Indian who acted for his tribe in the transaction which now made Kentucky over to the white man. "You have bought the land, but you will have trouble to settle it." It proved true. It was against his own kind that Boone's lasting resentment was fixed. Those damned Yankees who took from him, by the chicanery of the law and in his old age, every last acre of the then prosperous homestead he had at last won for himself after years of battle in the new country. confirmed in his distrust for his own kind. In old age, homeless and quite ruined, he must turn once more to his early loves, the savage and the wild. Once more a wanderer, he struck out through Tennessee for more elbow room, determined to leave the young nation which he had helped to establish definitely behind him. He headed for Spanish territory beyond the Mississippi, where the provincial governor, having gotten wind of the old hunter's state of mind, was glad to offer him a large tract of land on which to settle. There he lived and died, near 90, serving his traps as usual. In the woods, he would have an Indian for companion, even out of preference to his own sons, and from these men, the Indians, he had the greatest reverence, enjoying always, when afield with them, the signal honor of disposing them in the order of the hunt. Too late, the American Congress did follow him with some slight recognition. That was, by then, to him, really a small matter. He had already that which he wanted, the woods and native companions whom, in a written statement of great interest, he defends against all detractors, and in that defense establishes himself in clear words, the antagonist of those of his own blood whose alien strength he felt and detested, while his whole soul, with greatest devotion, was given to the new world which he adored and found in its every expression the land of heart's desire.